Antonio Navarra, CPD, Senior Building Inspector. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Robert Pruitt. Thanks for the chat. And Mike Walton.
I'm Mike Walton with the Residential Review Group and CPD.
Thank you. Okay, let's go through our stakeholders who are here participating. We'll start at the top of my list with Bill Rectanis.
Hi, everybody. Bill Rectanis, COO of Thrive Home Builders.
Thank you, Bill. Rob Buchanan.
Hey, Rob Buchanan, Residential New Construction Product Manager with Excel.
Thank you, Rob. Jonathan.
Jonathan Fertig, architect with Davis Partnership in Denver.
Thanks, Jonathan. Sean.
Hello, everyone. Again,
Hello.
Sean Denniston. Oh, wrong Sean.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I meant Sean Lamont.
Sean Lamont, yeah. Sean Lamont, Mitsubishi Performance Construction. And I'm in the car, so I'm going on mute.
Thank you, Sean. And let's see. Let's go to Sean Dennison then to say hi.
Hello, everyone. Sean Dennison with New Buildings Institute, and we are technical advisors to the city.
Great. And Robbie, do you want to say hi since you're one of the technical advisors also? So you're muted, Robbie.
Sorry about that. I'm Robbie Schwartz with Built Tank Inc. I'm one of the team members with Noresco's effort to support the city of Denver in their code adoption.
Thank you so much, Robbie. Okay, I am going to pass things to Sean to review the updated draft proposals, and he'll walk through how we think we've reflected everything we heard in your last meeting in these current proposals. And today is a chance to check that and see if that seems right to everyone and talk through it. Sean, and I'm passing it to, I should use last names every time I reference Sean in this meeting, to Sean Denniston.
All right. Thank you, Katrina. So we have modified the proposal based on our last discussion, and hopefully this can get us to our next stage of discussion. I want to highlight the high-level things that have happened here. And really the biggest one is that off-site renewables have been removed as an option. So one of the exceptions that we heard fairly loud and clear from the group that off-site renewables just is a complicated way to, is complicated for people, for projects in Denver, and so really wasn't workable in a mandatory requirement. So it's been removed entirely. And then also to reflect that along with it, in the previous draft, the exceptions worked so that you had to do 2 out of the 3 things for the list. Well, we just removed one of those things. So now we have 2 things, and you only need to do 1 of them. So an all-electric building just automatically complies, doesn't have to do the on-site renewable energy. But we also want to give an opportunity for a mixed fuel building to be able to make it through. And so there is an option to get more energy efficiency credits from section R408, our optional efficiency credits section. 17, as we discussed a while ago, so I'm going to go back over this really quickly. 17 is the value in carbon for efficiency relative to an on-site renewable energy system. So right now, the requirement is set at it's set at 20%. You can see the prescriptive conversion of that into kilobtu per year. So that's the equivalent, 17 credits out of table R408. Most of it remains the same, including this threshold, which is the 20%, which has been our starting point for these proposals. We think that this simplifies this substantially. It maintains flexibility for projects that can't do on-site renewable or maybe just don't want to. And we would like to continue our conversation? Does this address all the concerns? Now that you see this in a more simplified form, are you noticing something that you didn't notice before? And we'll open it to discussion.
Thank you, Sean. And just to sort of center all of our thinking, because I'm sure we all came into this from lots of different places in the virtual world. Remember, we have 3 proposals that this working group is working on, right? This is the minimum renewable proposal, and then there's the prescriptive R408 proposal. Which this, of course, has an option to get 17 efficiency credits from that one. And then there's the ERI proposal, which we won't focus on as much today, because I think from our past discussions, that is simpler to sort of calibrate to where the prescriptive version lands. So I think happy to have the group ask Sean any clarifying questions about this proposal. I'm thinking, and I'd love the group's feedback or Sean's feedback, that it may be helpful to also walk you through the latest draft of the prescriptive R408 proposal, so you can take a fresh look at sort of what would 17 energy efficiency credits mean in that proposal. But first, let's just take clarifying questions around this minimum renewable proposal. So Mike Walton, your hand went up.
Yeah, actually, but it was going to be tying into the prescriptive requirements for that same table. Aren't we requiring 18 credits just to follow prescriptive path IECC compliance?
We'll pull that back up and walk through it next, so you can see what everyone would have to do, so you can think of what 17 is in addition to that.
So it's 17 in addition to the 18?
Yes, it's in addition.
Doesn't read that way, does it?
So tell me if I'm wrong, Sean.
So it says 17 energy efficiency credits in addition to the requirements of R408. So it is definitely additional credits.
And I'll just note, I think that's one of the big questions for this group today is sort of, is 20% renewable energy, which is equivalent to 17 more efficiency credits, the right level of ambition for this minimum renewable proposal? Remember, this proposal will apply to all homes that are built, whether they take the prescriptive path or the ERI path. This is going to apply to all of them. So I want to make sure we're getting your feedback on that. Jonathan.
My question is about the definition for all electric property. And so, I mean, I understand that for residential projects, this won't really be an issue, but I'm wondering, because the definition would presumably be the same for the commercial code, that there's no provision for emergency generators. And I'm wondering what the conversation has been around that.
Yeah, Sean, Denniston, do you want to speak to that some? Because I don't think have quite the same definition actually for all electric and the way the commercial proposal is developing, but go ahead.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a nuance. So an all electric property does have, no natural gas or, combustion equipment. And the discussion that had been had previously with the committee was to not handle issues of emergency generation in the definition, but to do it in the requirements. So wherever all electric property is, wherever that's a path that you allow an all electric property to kind of violate the definition a little bit, that keeps a really consistent definition and also prevents exception creep in the definition. It's emergency power, backup power that's being clearly defined, and we can do that outside of the definition. But that does highlight a good point that we need to, there's been so much churn on these proposals that we need to make sure that that persists, particularly in commercial.
Thanks. And I see Bill's hand up with a question.
Yes, similar question on the all electric property definition. I'm assuming from the way this is written that it also includes cooking and fireplaces.
The way that it's written now does include cooking and fireplaces.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that is different than Excel's definition for their program, correct? So we have two differing definitions of all electric?
I've not seen Excel's definition, so we can double check on that.
Yes, that's different from our definition for res.
Because theirs, I believe, just included heating and water heating and allowed, since cooking and fireplaces were such a small proportion of the energy load, it did allow those in that definition. Which I would be an advocate of, being that gas heating is just such a, it's considered a luxury and it is in such high demand for the buying public. And I know that's a big sticking point for many builders to go away from, because just the options of electric and induction just have not reached an acceptance level in the marketplace that's giving them comfort, giving us comfort, if that makes sense.
Thanks for that feedback, Bill. Let's circle back to that conversation, but let's take a look, if we can, Sean Denniston, can you walk us through the prescriptive path? Because I want everyone to see, just so we're all thinking of it fresh in our minds. And Sean can talk through the changes that we've made based on the last conversation to this path. What would be required here if someone's on the prescriptive path, and then what it would take to get that kind of 17 extra points if someone picked the efficiency path through the minimum renewable proposal.
So it might be useful to look at this with all the changes. There's been a little bit of just text cleanup here in R401.2.5. A little note about the integration of R408 and R406. So the big change here is the way that all electric has been integrated into this section. Previously, there were line items for for electrification in general, not just all electric. There were line items for partial electrification, so space heating electrification and water heating electrification. And what pretty quickly became apparent is that the value for the high efficiency electric options was already pretty high in most cases, that was incentivizing partial electrification. And the path through this section for a partially electrified building was in some cases easier than an all electric building. And so some of the options have been removed, particularly if they are really high value electrification options. And then some of the other options have been, the credits available have been modulated to help encourage all electric. And I think this gets back to that question of the way that this is structured is that all electric is still incentivized over partially electrified. So if you electrified everything but your cooking and fireplace, you would have to do a little bit more efficiency than a true all electric building had to do. And this is to help incentivize the electrification of cooking, because cooking is not directly covered by the energy code. We do have some of these indirect ways to get at it, yet it's still a really important electrification issue. And it's also a really important issue for making the economics of electrification work, because the economics of electrification kind of depend on full electrification and actually eliminating the gas infrastructure. So really making sure that there's a path through that incentivizes full electrification over partial electrification. Now you're muted.
Sean, Sean, can you just review for folks how many points a gas building would need to take this prescriptive path, and how many points an all electric building would need through this prescriptive? Review those high level numbers for everyone.
Can you also zoom out just to here so we can see the full comments? They're cut off on the right hand side, please.
Oh,
thank you.
Is that still big enough for people to see?
I got my glasses on. I can make it work.
All right. So currently a all electric home would only need to get 3 credits, and those 3 credits correspond to the R408 packages that is currently in the IECC 2021. One package, if you look at kind of the least saving package in the packages version of R408, that's worth about 3%. So in order to make sure that the all-electric home doesn't have to be less efficient than IECC 2021, we want to make sure it's at least that efficient. All-electric gets 3, mixed fuel has to get 18. In general, that means probably the easiest path for most mixed fuel will be to do partial electrification, but there are lots of other envelope and duct tightening and other equipment options, high performance equipment options to get to 18 without doing partial electrification. In this discussion of how this interacts with the minimum renewables, if a mixed fuel project had to come through and do the minimum renewables, probably partial electrification would be effectively necessary. I think getting that combined 35 points without doing at least partial electrification would be challenging.
Yeah, so homes would end up needing to do either partial electrification or minimum renewables with or some renewables, with the kind of way the 2 proposals are structured to work together today. And that, I think, is one of the biggest questions for this group. We of course want to drive towards electrification, but how much can we do this code cycle? I think is one of the big questions, and we can calibrate some of that by recalibrating, if we need to, how many renewables are required in the minimum renewable proposal, because then that will correlate with then the 17 required efficiency points in that proposal could be somewhat lower if needed. So any just questions and clarifying questions on the changes that were made here?
I have one other definitional question on the all-electric property. That I'm wondering whether it seems like if you were to read it literally, which I guess is what we do with these things, that it would not only forbid a gas fireplace, but a wood fireplace. And I don't know if that's the intent.
Sean,
You're muted.
theme of the meeting, huh?
It's an epidemic. We can double check, but I believe that a wood fireplace would not meet the definition of appliance or equipment under the code.
Okay.
Does a wood fireplace violate fire code?
I would ask Mike Walton or someone from CPD to fill in.
Currently, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Go
currently we do not see wood fireplaces. It's gas only.
Yeah. I don't think they're allowed in Denver for air quality reasons, but again, I would defer to my colleagues in CPD.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Aren't you allowed a EPA qualified low emission wood fireplace in Denver?
I would have to double check and look into that. I can say that we have not seen anything of that nature in quite some time. And usually I think we refer people to DDPHE and they say there's no wood burning fireplaces allowed due to air quality.
Yeah. Other just clarifying questions in terms of what these proposals do and don't say, and then let's get into the discussion.
If I'm speaking out of turn, and we should bring it up later. I do want to talk about 408.9.1 and .2. Is it intentional that we're limiting it to HRVs, or should we be throwing ERVs in there as well? Should we just call it a balanced ventilation system or something like that? Because in Minnesota, it's written into the code. That's it. I'll post the text in chat from the Minnesota Energy Code that requires balanced ventilation, but is technology agnostic. And so I don't know how heavily we want to borrow from that as far as that ventilation, but there are ERV is a viable technology, and yeah, I don't know if somebody on this call can answer this question, but I do have our engineers looking into it, and that an ERV might be a more efficient option in a more arid climate than an HRV, given the recovery of both latent and sensible heat. So we're looking into that for a better answer, but I want to make sure that we aren't limiting ourselves or that we aren't limiting ourselves technology wise in those whole home ventilation solutions.
Sure. So I can answer that question, and then that might spark more discussion later. An ERV is technically an HRV as well. We could certainly be more clear with the text, and just in case people don't know that, ERVs in Denver do save more energy than HRVs. However, once you begin to take into account construction costs, the cost effectiveness on an ERV versus an HRV, that balance really shifts. And that's why the requirement here was for an HRV. It's not that an ERV doesn't do any good. It's just that it's marginal additional energy savings for more than marginal additional cost. So that's why the requirement is for HRV alone. We wanted to make it as cost effective as possible, but we could clarify the language to say heat or energy recovery, just in case people, don't realize that an ERV is an HRV as well.
Yeah, this is Sean Lamont. I would definitely support that clarifying language, because there's a lot of building professionals that still are unclear of the difference or the benefits. So I would clarify it.
And I did post the full mechanical ventilation, the full section on mechanical ventilation from the Minnesota Energy Code. So if you guys, if that's at all helpful, or if you need me to email it, I can do that too.
Thank you. Any other, I think that's perfect for the kind of clarifying questions of but let's also just get into the discussion. Maybe before we do, I think maybe two things that we talked about last time that, if that's all right, Sean, I hope you might be able to touch on. We talked about if a building is all electric, they should not, if a home is all electric, they should not be able to get their 3 additional credits with mechanical efficiency. The group wanted them to actually need to do some envelope efficiency improvements. So I don't know if you want to point out that language here and see if the group agrees with how we reflected what I think the group said last time.
So there was, in the last discussion, expressed this idea of maybe it would be best for the all electric not to just be able to skate through with getting their credits from equipment, because the reality is that most of the heat pumps that are on the market already exceed the federal minimums, and so it might just kind of be a gimme for all electric buildings. So we included in here language that says that you can't get credits from that above code efficiency equipment on the all electric path. You would have to get it from the envelope, or I guess you could say HVAC, non-equipment HVAC measures, like around the ductwork. And so we were hoping to get some feedback on that, whether we do think that that's a good idea to include or not.
Well, that's a bit of a can of worms. Again, are you including? Again, I apologize. I don't have my eyes on everything as I'm driving. Are you requiring duct leakage testing or quality installation details that are, now becoming more prevalent in new construction, but not a guarantee if they're not doing, say, a HERS rating or Energy Star?
So there are requirements in 2021 for duct testing. I'll need to double check to see if the insulation quality installation proposals actually made it into 2021. I know they were contentious, so they may or may not be in there. But at least the duct testing is part of the base code that Denver will be adopting as part of 2021.
Well, quality installation of insulation was not added in the 2021. More than just the requirements of the air sealing insulation installation table. Whatnot.
And is this a total duct leakage or a leakage to outside test?
I believe the base code for residential is a total duct leakage, although Robbie can probably answer that one better than I can.
Yes. The base code is total leakage. Duct leakage outside is only used in the R405 performance path and the ERI path, I guess.
Okay, let's go ahead and open this up for a discussion. What do you folks think about either of these proposals and how they fit together? Knowing that, of course, the ERI path will, also exist as an alternative to this prescriptive path, and it will be calibrated to sort of align with it.
Maybe we can start with a direct question, whether the limitations for all electric on equipment efficiencies, is that something that the group thinks we should include? Or does it raise any red flags?
I apologize. Can you ask that question again?
So the restrictions for all electric buildings where they can't use above code efficiency equipment to get credits, is that a good limitation to force those buildings to get efficiency elsewhere, or does that raise red flags for anyone, or even yellow flags?
Well, probably the only thing that stands out to me that the building is going to be there longer than the equipment, and it's generally almost always makes sense to make the buildings better than it does to require better equipment, because if the equipment is out of there in 20 years, yes, you're going to have a better piece of technology most likely, but it could be out of there in 2 years, and regardless, it's still a net energy loss out of the building shell. So I would certainly encourage a better building shell over trying to push higher efficiency equipment. So it doesn't help.
Yeah.
Maybe
that's aligned, Sean, with what we heard from others in the group last time. So unless someone disagrees, I think we can move on. We just wanted to give space because we didn't have a lot of time on that last time to discuss. I'm happy to sort of take other comments. I might put a couple folks on the spot, if not, because Bill, you raised that sometimes you have real demand from homeowners in some of what you build to put in those gas fireplaces and gas cooktops. And so when you look at these two proposals, I also don't know how often you all are taking the prescriptive path with the homes you build. But when you look at these two proposals and you look at how many points you're going to get, if you did electric space heat and electric water heat, and then you'd have to get, those extra 3 + 17 efficiency credits, unless you put renewables on, does that look, doable, getting 20 efficiency credits? There's a bunch of ways to do that when I glance at it, but does this sit right with you, or does the 20% minimum renewable, does that seem like the right level for that minimum renewable proposal? I'd love some feedback from you or others, but since you'd commented that you don't always kind of feel like the market has that option at this point to just build all electric, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think I'm generally okay with the 20% renewables number. I'm having trouble going through here and adding up points in my head to try and figure out how I'd get to 35 points most effectively. I mean, I'm curious because I don't know, this 5% reduction in UA or 10% reduction in UA above 2021. What does that include? That, to me, that seems like a pretty big leap. But I don't know. I'd have to look to somebody like Robbie that has more rating expertise than I do on those particular requirements.
Are you putting me on the spot?
I guess when I mean, or anybody that has, 5% reduction in UA is completely arbitrary and meaningless to me off the top of my head. I couldn't possibly tell you practically from a dollar standpoint or a specification standpoint what that means. And that's just me. I was hoping that somebody could provide some clarity on that. Does that just mean dropping my windows from a 0.28 to a 0.25 and I'm there? Or does it mean like all of a sudden including continuous exterior installation in my build? Because those are two vastly different things when it comes to cost and production and quality management.
So with the modeling that I've done in the past with your homes build, your current package is already close to or at that 5% better.
Okay.
We're talking about with respect to 21, right? The 21 UA.
Yeah. So
I think I can check in. Like, I'm not gonna be able to do it now, but I think next week I could probably let you know exactly where. I think I'm of a mind with Robbie that just knowing how your wall assemblies typically look, they're going to be it's going to be pretty darn good, even with respect to 21. So I can try to scare up exactly how, like, the homes that run through our program, I can try to scare up exactly what kind of percent reduction UA relative to 21 we're seeing right now. It might take me a couple of days to get that rustled up, but I know that's not going to do us much good in the next 25 minutes.
Well, that's okay. Some of what we want to put together is a list of things people need to research and think about a bit more. Anything else you wanted to add or other questions you have, Bill? It sounds like you also might need to sort of dig through and see, like, is 35 doable if you're not going to be all electric and you're not going to do the renewables. But any other thoughts from you? And then I might call on others.
I would say that's my biggest concern, is to meet 408 and then get the 17 additional on top of 408. Seems like you need to do most everything on this list, just from looking at the numbers and scrolling down the list. And, I haven't spent any time looking at it, but it seems like a heavy lift to get to 35.
For that question about UA, so 2021 has a package in it right now that is the 5% reduction. So it's, we're just piling on top of that. I would say, looking at what is in 2021, you can technically get by with cavity only insulation, but it's R30. I'm not sure who would build a cavity only R30 wall. So 2021 is, I think, practically already starting to push toward continuous insulation. And so if you most likely be looking at either using one of the continuous insulation options that's already in 2021 with either a deeper cavity or a better insulation in the cavity, or thickening the continuous insulation that's in the assembly to be able to achieve these. The window performance that's in 2021 is still not anything stellar. And then for Climate Zone 5, R60 in the ceiling, that's a good amount. So going above that, I think that it would be difficult to just say, I'm going to improve my windows and I'm there. You would probably have to make improvements to most of your surfaces or at least make more substantial improvements to, like all but one of your surfaces to be able to get there.
But you have to also remember that it gives you the ability to trade off, so you don't have to potentially upgrade all of your components. You could upgrade one of them and maybe get there, depending on where you're
You might be able to. And then, since we're discussing, I think the Minnesota, or is it Michigan? I forget. I've seen this language before. Is for balanced ventilation, and I think in this case, an important thing to keep in mind is that I do know that they went with this requirement for air quality issues. They put it in the energy code because they could. And so that's why they did balanced ventilation, because their homes were having air quality issues with exhaust only ventilation with the tight construction that they were requiring. And so balanced ventilation does save energy over unbalanced ventilation, but only when the unbalanced ventilation is actually meeting ventilation standards, which it almost never is. So balanced ventilation alone usually increases energy use, which is why the measure is for heat recovery, which necessitates balance, but also gets you the heat recovery.
It's not an accident that it's written like that. It's intended to it's the path towards requiring HRV without actually saying HRV is required. Because every house that we see has HRVs in it in Minnesota, but we also see better buildings in Minnesota than we do in Colorado, to be frank.
Yeah, there's certainly more balanced ventilation equipment that is an ERV or an HRV than is not. There's only a very small number of balanced ventilation equipment for residential that's not some kind of energy recovery. There's a couple. Braun makes one, and you could always do it with independent systems as well.
I have to ask probably a contentious question, but it's important, I think, to ask. I mean, part of codes are not only energy, but also health and safety. And so when you're looking at an HRV instead of an ERV, you're looking at drying out the house in the winter, which incentivizes someone putting in active humidification. Active humidification adds moisture into the envelope and moisture into the walls. And now you've got, a lack of continuous insulation on the walls. And now you've got dew point on the inside surface of the outside part of the wall. All of this goes back to building durability, indoor air quality, et cetera, right? Dew point related issues, et cetera. So I like the idea of, getting to the HRV through language, but I really think that there's a societal benefit to pushing past just systems that will do the job and moving past those to systems that do the better job and are better for us in terms of health and longevity, et cetera. And exterior insulation and ERVs are two of those important items to think about.
Is there something you might propose that would give more points for those, or how would you see solving that, Sean? Lamont or Dennison?
I have no idea. I'm sorry. Totally unhelpful in that way.
Sean, Dennison, or Robbie, or others?
You could always link the HRV requirement to choosing a continuous insulation option for complying with the base code. Since there are different ways to meet the wall insulation requirement in the base code, you could say, if you want this option, you have to have a wall assembly that includes this minimum amount of continuous insulation to manage the dew point. An important thing to consider here is that the building science around indoor moisture and wall assemblies is a little bit skewed toward existing buildings. So in a modern building where infiltration is controlled, it's it's much less of an issue. The moisture issues that we see in wall assemblies are driven primarily by infiltration and not by absorption. And so, just because you have moisture on the inside doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to just migrate into the wall. We'll see some, but when we see actual moisture issues in the wall, it's because of infiltration. It's, we really only see moisture issues in walls in two circumstances. One is where there's infiltration, and then the other is where there is wild moisture problems in a house. But you raise a problem, you've raised the issue, someone brings a humidifier into their house, they might be introducing wild moisture issues into their home.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally, and also add that we are in climate zone 5B, the dry climate zone, and it's very different here than it is in moist climate zones. So we've actually in the Denver code and in other codes around the state, they've kind of gotten rid of or are allowing great exceptions to the use of a class 1 vapor retarder, specifically because most of the moisture doesn't go into our walls by diffusion. It's with air leakage. So we're building tight, and the assumption of the dew point analysis that happens is that there's moisture in the walls to begin with, and we're avoiding that, I think, largely by building our houses tight, and we're allowing drying mechanisms because we don't, unlike Minnesota, we don't install class 1 vapor retarders in any semblance of way that will stop air leakage as well. So we end up trapping that moisture into our assemblies. We on the other side of the equation are allowing drying potential if that moisture gets into the assembly. So I don't think it's that a big as issue as you might think, Sean.
Robbie, I must confess, I fully expect to start seeing building failures in Minnesota in the next 3 to 5 years, just as a direct result of our class 1 vapor retarder use. But that's beyond our scope of our conversation here.
Okay. That's helpful. Sean Lamont, if you have other questions, maybe I can ask you to take that offline with us. Sean,
Yeah,
and Rob,
no problem.
sort of
I just wanted to bring it up.
some of that,
I'm
but
glad
it's
we
a
chatted
good
about it.
flag. And I think if there's more that you want to talk about there, let's do that, so that we find that right balance here. Comments from others on this overall level of ambition and other elements that you're seeing. The other thing I guess I might flag quickly is Sean Dennison. The other thing I have in our notes in the minimum renewables proposal is that we had a discussion in our last meeting specifying that the requirement is not for all buildings on the site. So, garages and sheds wouldn't have to meet this requirement, but we had the question of like, should we allow garages and sheds to contain PV that would contribute to the requirement? And I assume the group would think, yeah, why not let a garage or shed have solar on it? But that was just another question we had as we started drafting based on your last comment. I don't know if you want to show Sean Dennison sort of where we are at that language around garages not having to.
Well, wouldn't garages already be exempt since they're not conditioned floor area, typically? And if they are conditioned floor area, shouldn't they be part of the calculation?
That's how it's structured right now. So
Yeah.
that if you have unconditioned either auxiliary buildings or area in your home for whatever reason, that wouldn't be included in the calculation. And then with the definition of on-site renewable energy system, that lets you put your renewable energy anywhere. You can put it on the roof of your home. You can put it on a detached garage. You can, put it in a installation art piece in your front yard, wherever you want.
Now, the one piece I'll ask the city to consider is, I know in California we have accessory dwelling units, and the state did remove the requirement for renewables on accessory dwelling units only because we have a housing crisis, and that increases the cost of housing. That would be the only other consideration I can think of in this language.
something that we're seeing in some other codes is to just say, dwelling units that are under a certain size are exempt from certain requirements, to exempt both ADUs and tiny houses.
Yeah.
Is that something that the group thinks should be utilized in minimum renewables? And if so, what's that threshold?
I can look it up for California real quick. I think it was 500 square feet, but let me check.
While you're checking that, Mark, thank you for that suggestion. What else is on folks' mind? I think that and see if I get this right. I might call out one of our other stakeholders, Jonathan. I don't know what, in your experience designing homes, does this all kind of sit well with you? I heard Bill say generally he likes the 20% renewable idea, but I think he needs to vet the 35 points a little bit further before sort of saying, yeah, that works. Like, do you have sort of a gut check on where you're at, or anybody else that, Mike Walton, you see a ton of these plans come through. I'm happy to have anybody else chime in. I'm just calling on a few folks that I know just see a lot of this. Are we getting close? What feedback do you have?
So I mean, like I had mentioned last time, my experience is commercial, not residential, but I'm coming at this just from a passive house perspective. So one thing I was wondering was whether there was room in, say, the air leakage points to establish another level where if you hit passive house levels of air tightness, which would be 0.6, that's another, looks like that would be, I don't know, maybe that's 4 points or something, to sort of acknowledge that at that point you're starting to get into really good buildings. And I guess to echo what everybody else was saying, I mean, I think we should be doing everything we can to encourage continuous insulation. It's kind of insane not to be building new construction right now without CI. So I guess that's all I've got on that. And yes, go ERVs, big fan.
I would say, as far as continuous insulation, one thing to consider, and I understand the building science behind the benefits of continuous insulation, but from a builder's perspective, it is a significant change in a lot of detailing when you start adding continuous insulation, and the construction defect risk for litigation out there is so extreme in the state of Colorado. Me personally, I will be trying to meet the energy code every way I can without going to continuous insulation to limit my risk based on those detail changes that are going to have to happen, the high level of training and oversight that's going to have to exist to make sure that the siding nails are the right length, and all of these things, the window installation details are properly done. It changes things in a way that for me personally as a home builder that is at risk for lawyers knocking on my door in 7.5 years is scary. And of all of these things that we're doing to improve buildings, I understand the benefit of it, but having options out there that allow builders another pathway until that becomes more commonplace and the details more set in place with all the different manufacturers of exterior cladding products and the training exists out in the field, I would be a huge advocate of continuing those additional options as opposed to really pushing towards continuous insulation too quickly.
Really helpful feedback. Mike Walton or anybody else, and Mark Rodriguez from Sunrun. Did you find that?
I'm
Or
still
anybody
looking.
else? Comments and
Still
okay.
looking.
No, that's fine. We do have another meeting where we can circle around on this. I might say, I do want, we can take more comments, but then I want to make sure we're digging in to make sure this overall level of ambition is right. That sort of 35 points.
Just a quick, probably easy question for city staff on how this is going to be, as far as the building permit process, how this requirement is going to be tracked, because typically we're not including the solar in our energy calculations or in our one lines, and those are added later with a separate permit by the solar installer. So how do we just marry those two to make sure that we'd be in compliance with this down the road procedurally? Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, no, I think that is something the city still is yet to work out. The same with mechanical, electrical, or plumbing. They're all separate. They're permitted separately. So that process will have to be refined within the city.
Okay.
Bill, can I, it sounds like you want to do some more digging on what that kind of right level of ambition is to make sure that this 20% renewable and 17 points works. Do you or others have suggestions on who else we can tag to sort of run some projects and run some samples through this to make sure this sits as kind of doable so that this group feels like, do we have enough people here to say that to the code committee? Do we need to pull in or reach out to some others to sort of vet this so that we can bring it back and say, this works to our community? I think we've got a really good group here, but I'd love, any thoughts from any of you in terms of, if we go do a little more homework, is this group enough to sort of give the code committee confidence saying this makes sense? Because they're going to be relying on a handful of residential experts on that committee, of which some of them are here.
I think it would make sense to get some of the mechanical engineers with the city in on this as well.
Great.
So maybe
Like,
Keith
if you have
Fox or
ideas
Chuck
of,
Bartel.
oh yes, exactly. Okay, I can read. Who else did you say? Chuck and
Keith Fox, I think, has been involved. Otherwise, Chuck Bartel.
yep, I can reach out to them. Does anybody else have thoughts in terms of anybody else we just want to say, hey, now that we're close, can you take a look at this?
I mean, from my perspective, it'd be great to have another builder or two just look at this from their perspective. Obviously, we've been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time at our company, but coming from a builder that's got to step up to 2021 for the first time and meet this, they may have a different perspective than I do. And I don't know, Robbie, if you know somebody that we might be able to run this past on the side that could give us another set of eyes from a builder perspective.
Yeah, it seems like we could reach out to John Dutch or some of the builders that have been on this committee. Would be a great starting point.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. We can do that. Just ask, somebody to take another look. It sounds like Bill, you'll kind of run through some of these numbers before we meet next time. Does anybody else feel like directionally though we're going the right direction? We just need to sort of pick calibration. Is 20% renewable and 17 efficiency points really doable, or should it be a little bit less this particular code cycle? Seems like kind of the only outstanding question. Plus, there's a couple little things we're going to chase down that are on the list. Anything else that we need to be considering?
Just as you do that, looking at the numbers, we did calibrate this so that if you have a mixed fuel home that has gas water heating and gas space heating both, that you can still get to that 35, but you do have to do almost everything. You don't have to do everything, but you do have to do almost everything. So for buildings that are mixed fuel and don't have renewables, probably partial electrification is going to be the most reasonable path through to get that 35. It's a lot easier to do it if there's, for just that 18, you can hit 18 with gas water heating and gas space heating with, choosing a few things. But getting all the way to the 35 probably does require most of the other credits.
Yep. Okay. Anybody else have things they want to add? If not, we will look to folks to kind of report back on check their checks of does this work? Should it be calibrated slightly differently in our next meeting? And we'll also start to dive in on the ERI proposal, which will really just be calibrated to these. I don't think that has as many changes. Anything else you want to flag for people to think about on the ERI proposal, Robbie or Sean Dunstan, as they're thinking about this?
The only thing that I will note is that we probably need a little bit better integration on our 406 and the minimum renewables. They work right now, but making it more explicit to improve usability, I think, will be something that we need to include in the next draft.
Thanks. We will get so we're not going to change the overall points, but we will clean up the draft based on some of that research and to the usability point. And so you will get another draft from us the week before your next meeting. But know that like the just general stringency and categories, I don't think we're planning to change at this point. You're just going to be vetting that with us but over the next 2 weeks. So you can start that vetting now before we send the next draft out. Okay, thank you all so much. Again, always happy to stay on if somebody wants to just chat a little bit further. I'll stay a couple minutes. And thank you so much for your time. I think we're really making progress here. So thank you for this extra time, especially for code committee members. This is added on top of the code committee meetings that you signed up for. So thanks again, and we'll see you in your next meeting in 2 weeks. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.